Someone in Congress is finally asking the right questions that veterans actually care about, and it's no other than Senator Warren, which, to be honest with you, is kind of out of left field. There's a pun there. The issue for every single veteran's claim is and always has been C&P examiners. There's no doubt about that. C&P examiners remain the single point of failure for every single claim. Here, exams have led, in my opinion, to claims consulting companies. These exams have led to millions and millions of denials and ultimately leave veterans guessing if they even deserve VA compensation in the first place or not. So what I'm going to show you is this article from military.com, and I'll tell you about what we can do about this problem because the problem exists. So whether we, complain about it or not, the problem is still present in all of our claims. So until the problem is solved, we have to do what's best for us. So here is the article from military.com, and I'll have this posted in the link. I'll have the link posted in the pinned comments, but it really talks about disturbing reports of inadequate and unprofessional treatment of veterans. Yes, the unprofessional treatment definitely sucks. I'm really going to hone in on the inadequate piece when it comes to VA claims. And to start this out, in a letter from Senator Elizabeth Warren to VA Secretary, our boy Dennis McDonough, pushed for answers to May 14th on a ton of questions done by private contractors in light of multiple complaints that she said she received about quality of exams in both her home state and across the country. Okay, this is actually a pretty big deal because now that a senator is barking up the VA's chain, it's likely to see some change. Okay, contrary to popular belief, the VA is not the enemy, right? It's not your VSO, it's not your VA rater. The enemy, in my opinion, is actually the C&P examiner. And that's really what Senator Warren is getting at here. The VA solely relies on C&P exams. Now, there is some debate uncovered by the OIG report of 22 where the VA failed to follow proper procedures like sending evidence to C&P examiners, which is absolutely and definitely a big deal. But for the most part, if the C&P examiner says your claimed condition is less likely as not, well, that's going to result in a denial, and that's pretty much the end of your claim, right? Now, there is something we can do about this problem, but we'll get to that here in a sec. Let's get back to the article. Probably the strongest statement in this article from Senator Warren, and it is definitely a huge deal, is this statement right here. And I'm going to go ahead and read it verbatim. For example, constituents have reported to my office that contractor examiners failed to review service treatment records of veterans prior to their appointments and shredded medical questionnaires instead of adding them to medical files as evidence because VA policy does not allow examiners to add anything to veterans' medical records. That is a huge deal, okay? They have indicated that contractors directed veterans to meet them for exams outside of medical facilities, including co-working offices, broom closets, and hotel rooms. I've heard that same thing. But going back to the service treatment records and not being able to review any outside evidence, that's absolutely true. And if you had an examiner that did go above and beyond, one, good on you. That's a solid examiner and good on them. But most won't because they don't have to. And there really isn't a way to regulate the C&P examiners. And in my opinion, the VA's problem right now is transparency between the veteran and the C&P examiner. It's insane that the power a C&P examiner has over that veteran's claim. It's absolutely insane. Okay. Now, Senator Warren talks about her constituents consistently complaining about these exams. And what I want to point out here is that your voice matters. If enough veterans speak on the same issue, your voice will be heard. One or two, no big deal, right? But thousands and thousands from various states, districts, and across the country, that becomes a bigger deal. And if you want change, you have to make change. The VA's press secretary makes a bold statement, and something I want to point out, and this is definitely a theme the VA has been pushing recently, and we've seen this statement almost word for word from various people within the VA, okay? The VA's mission is to provide every veteran with benefits that they have earned for their service to our nation, yada, 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 and will never settle for anything less, says the VA Press Secretary Terrence Hayes, okay? Now, here is the strong statement. Whenever a veteran applies for benefits, our goal is to provide them with the best experience possible and do everything in our power to get to a yes. The VA has said that before, meaning they're preaching talking points. I don't know, right? But it doesn't seem as genuine when we've heard that same statement over and over and over again. It just does not seem genuine, okay? Now, CMP exams being contracted out alleviates the workload on VA doctors and medical professionals, which is great. That is a good thing, except when CMP exam companies go haywire and start doing some wild stuff. For instance, and I'll leave his name out, but I was helping a veteran that had a medical opinion from a psychiatrist, and that IMO was rock solid and backed by medical evidence. The exam company sent that veteran to a nurse practitioner. Yes, you've heard that right. The NP gave a negative opinion. Now this and that claim resulted in a denial, okay? Now that claim is a super easy higher level review, so I have zero doubt that claim will be awarded, but it is insane that it was even sent to a nurse practitioner in the first place, especially since the veteran had a solid independent medical opinion and a DBQ, which is a fully developed claim. It shouldn't have warranted a CMP exam, in my opinion, anyways. Now, I've had negative CMP exam experiences on multiple claims, one in particular in Fairfax, Virginia. This examiner was rude and did not want to hear what I had to say at all. All of those claims came back at 0%, so I had to do a higher level review with an informal conference to talk some sense and to be heard. And this brings me to the biggest point I want to make in this video is on what you, the veteran, can do. Because this problem is not going to go away anytime soon, meaning we have to play the hand that we are dealt, all right? Veterans have got to stop sending in their claim without evidence. The whole reason claims consulting companies are successful is because they arm the veteran with evidence. This is not my opinion, okay? This is a fact. So what you got to do now is gather your evidence. Don't pay thousands of dollars to have someone gather the evidence for you. Just do it yourself. It's not hard. Now, don't submit baloney evidence, okay? Because I've talked a ton of veterans who thought they had all the evidence, but when I take a look and ask them a few questions, they actually had none. So let's go ahead and talk about what evidence actually is. Evidence is and only is the big three. No more, no less. It's the big three. And at a minimum, you need the first two. And the third really depends on situation, and we'll get into that, okay? So first is the in-service event. You absolutely have to have evidence from service, right? Whether that's medical evidence or evidence other than medical, which is what most veterans are going to fall into, but you have to have some type of evidence from service. Right? Medical evidence, a diagnosis would be like the standard, the golden standard from your pre-deployment health assessments, your annual health assessments, post-deployment health assessments, all that stuff. Your exit exam, that would be great. But there's also evidence other than medical. Like, for instance, I had a friend that had 7 combat deployments and claimed their knees, and they were service-connected on 0 medical evidence, but they had the combat deployments and duties like patrolling, right, with the heavy rucksack as evidence other than medical. And of course, you can look at the diagnosis and see the knees deteriorating, meaning it didn't happen overnight, right? The second piece of evidence is the current diagnosis. This is not negotiable. You either have a diagnosis or you don't, right? And yes, the C&P examiner can give you a diagnosis if you have documented symptoms to back their diagnosis, but C&P exams are a one-time visit and it's a legal exam. It's not even a healthcare exam, okay? So they're really not in the business of handing out diagnosis because it's not their role to do that. What this means for you is prior to submitting that claim, because our intent to file is 12 months, all right? Prior to submitting that claim, you go get a current diagnosis. Current meaning within 1 year, right? I will look you straight in the eye if you submit your claim without a diagnosis and then you're denied because you weren't diagnosed, and I will call you stupid right to your face, right? Now that you know you need a diagnosis, if you submit your claim without one, right, the boot kind of fits. You understand? And the last thing, which is the third one, is the Nexus. Every single claim will require a Nexus, whether that's from a C&P examiner or private. In a lot of cases, both, because that's its own story, right? I generally do not recommend paying for a private Nexus upfront with your claim. Reason being is because if you have the in-service event and the current diagnosis, then the examiner should logically be able to see the connection, right? This happens majority of the time. Most claims are awarded without a private Nexus just based on evidence from service and the current diagnosis, believe it or not, right? The loudest voice in the room is heard. So everyone who's been denied is speaking a lot more than everyone who's been approved. So keep that in mind, right? It depends on the reason for denial as to what your next steps are, but generally speaking, that is when I would start considering a private Nexus from the highest doctor within that specialty. So if it's mental health, I would recommend a psychiatrist. I would not recommend a psychologist. Now, can a psychologist write a Nexus and that veteran be awarded? Absolutely, right? But if you're paying for a Nexus, why not go to the one who carries the most weight when they give an opinion, right? That's my personal opinion, but that same thing applies for like physicians, audiologists. You get the point. Now, can you submit a Nexus up front with your claim? You absolutely can, and it's totally okay. It would make your claim very strong, but the overwhelming majority of claims do not require a private Nexus, and I personally don't recommend them unless these two things are true. One, you've been denied, and two, you have the evidence. Why? Because the evidence and the evidence alone is what makes the Nexus.